The stage was set long before the cameras began to roll. The marble walls, the hushed whispers of journalists scribbling notes, the faint hum of anticipation, it all built toward a confrontation no one could have scripted better. When Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett walked into the chamber, her presence was undeniable. Poised, sharp, and carrying the energy of someone who had nothing to lose but everything to fight for, she immediately shifted the atmosphere. Across from her sat Pam Bondi, the seasoned prosecutor turned pundit who had long thrived on spectacle and polished delivery. Tonight, though, Bondi's reputation was about to be tested in ways she never imagined. Bondi's supporters thought her record would shield her. She had faced cameras countless times, defended controversial positions, and leaned on her years of courtroom experience. She had perfected the art of sounding authoritative, even when her arguments were thin. But Jasmine Crockett was a different kind of opponent. Crockett wasn't there to posture or impress. She was there to reveal truths, to rip off the veil of performance, and to do so with surgical precision. From the first exchange, the difference in energy was palpable. Bondi's words came rehearsed, coated in the gloss of media training, while Crockett's responses burned with authenticity. It wasn't simply that Crockett had facts, she had conviction. She spoke like someone who had lived the battles she was describing, someone who understood that behind every statistic was a face, a story, a real person whose life had been affected. That authenticity made Bondi's polished performance look hollow by comparison. The first blow landed quickly. Bondi attempted to cite her legal record as a shield against criticism, pointing to her past roles in high-profile cases. Crockett didn't flinch. With a subtle but piercing smile, she countered with specific moments when Bondi's selective prosecutions raised eyebrows, where her credibility faltered under scrutiny, where her allegiance seemed less to justice and more to politics. The room shifted. Journalists perked up, the tension tightened like a drum. Then Crockett did something few expected. Instead of simply hammering at Bondi's record, she zoomed out, connecting Bondi's decisions to larger systemic failures. She painted a picture of privilege and selective accountability, showing how Bondi's choices weren't isolated but part of a broader pattern. It wasn't just about what Bondi had done, it was about what she represented. Bondi tried to interrupt, her voice rising, her hands gesturing with practiced indignation, but Crockett remained steady. She waited for Bondi's interruption to trail off, then delivered her counter like a blade sliding between armor. Each time, the crowd reacted, gasps, murmurs, even laughter in moments when Crockett's wit cut through Bondi's bluster. What elevated this moment beyond mere political theater was Crockett's command of detail. She wasn't just reacting, she was leading. At one point, she pulled a folder from her desk, its contents meticulously organized. She cited case law, inconsistencies in Bondi's own statements, even data that revealed the real-world consequences of Bondi's positions. It was a masterclass in preparation meeting opportunity. The highlight came when Crockett, leaning forward with unshakable calm, delivered the line that would soon echo across every media platform in America. Pam, the truth doesn't bend to your will. And today, no matter how hard you try, you can't escape it. The room froze. Bondi blinked rapidly, searching for a response, but found none. What unfolded in those opening minutes wasn't just a debate, it was a dismantling. Crockett wasn't merely refuting Bondi. She was exposing her, revealing the cracks beneath the polished surface, showing the audience that the emperor had no clothes. In just 30 seconds, a career that had thrived on carefully curated soundbites began to crumble under the weight of unflinching truth. Bondi's face told the story. The forced smile, the shifting in her seat, the way her voice lost its edge as she realized she was no longer in control. Crockett, meanwhile, only grew stronger. Each word was delivered with the cadence of someone who knew history was on her side, who understood that this moment was bigger than her or Bondi. It was about accountability, justice, and the power of truth spoken plainly. By the time part 1 came to a close, the verdict in the court of public opinion was already clear. Bondi looked rattled, diminished, stripped of the aura she had carried in. Crockett stood unshaken, commanding, her words reverberating through the chamber and out into the millions watching at home. What began as a showdown was quickly turning into a rout. The dust from the first exchange had barely settled, yet the tension in the chamber only deepened. Pam Bondi, still visibly shaken from Jasmine Crockett's opening salvo, tried desperately to recover her composure. She leaned into her microphone, straightening her papers as though reordering them could somehow reorder the narrative. Her voice, once steady and sharp, carried a faint tremor. She attempted to reframe the discussion. Congresswoman Crockett, she began, with all due respect, you're confusing passion with fact. The law is not about emotion, it's about precedent and principle, and I stand on my record. Bondi's words were crisp, but the confidence behind them was forced. The audience could sense it. The cameras captured every shift of her eyes, every flicker of discomfort. Crockett didn't immediately respond. Instead, she allowed the silence to stretch an intentional pause that magnified Bondi's unease. When Crockett finally leaned into her microphone, her voice was calm, deliberate, and cutting. Pam, she said, the problem isn't passion. The problem is your record, and the public deserves to know what that record really means. The crowd stirred. It wasn't just what Crockett said, it was how she said it. Each word landed with the weight of lived experience, with the authority of someone who had walked the streets, fought the fights, and seen the consequences of policies crafted in marble halls by people who never felt their impact. Crockett began to weave a narrative that was larger than Bondi's resume. She tied Bondi's past decisions to stories of individuals whose lives had been altered by her choices. The mother who lost her son to a system that seemed rigged against him. The community that suffered because of selective enforcement. The cases that were dropped when money and politics entered the picture. Crockett didn't just attack Bondi's record, she humanized the cost of it. Bondi tried to interrupt again, her voice rising with the urgency of someone losing control. That's misleading! That's an oversimplification! She barked. But Crockett was ready. She turned Bondi's interruption into an opportunity. Oversimplification? Crockett shot back. Tell that to the families who lived through the consequences. Tell that to the communities left behind. This isn't oversimplification, Pam. It's reality. And reality doesn't bend to your spin. The chamber erupted. Murmurs spread like wildfire, and the journalists in the press row scribbled furiously. They knew this was no ordinary exchange. This was a defining moment. Bondi attempted a different tactic, reverting to legal jargon, citing statutes and precedents in an effort to reassert authority, but Crockett dismantled each citation with ease. Her legal training showed she wasn't just a congresswoman. She was an attorney who had built her career on advocacy and justice. Where Bondi's arguments felt mechanical, Crockett's counterpoints were alive, sharp, and dripping with precision. The brilliance of Crockett's performance was not just in her command of facts, but in her ability to connect them to larger truths. She didn't just argue the law, she argued the morality, accountability, and the soul of public service. In doing so, she exposed the hollowness of Bondi's position. At one point, Crockett leaned forward and posed a direct question that would haunt Bondi for the rest of the night. Pam, you keep talking about the law as if it's detached from humanity. But tell me this, when the law is applied unequally, when it favors the powerful and punishes the powerless, is that justice, or is that the very betrayal of justice itself? Bondi faltered. Her mouth opened, but no words came. The silence that followed was devastating. The camera zoomed in on her face, capturing the hesitation, the flicker of panic. Crockett didn't let the moment slip. Justice without humanity is nothing but tyranny with a gavel. And that's the record you stand on. The reaction was electric. Social media lit up instantly. Hashtags began to trend as clips of the exchange circulated in real time. Viewers across the country weren't just watching a debate, they were witnessing a dismantling, a career unraveling thread by thread. Bondi's frustration grew, her voice sharpened, her arguments grew defensive, and her once controlled demeanor cracked. She began to lash out, accusing Crockett of grandstanding, of playing to the cameras, but every accusation only deepened the contrast. Crockett didn't need theatrics. Her quiet confidence and razor-sharp delivery spoke louder than any performance. By the midpoint of part 2, it was clear to everyone watching that Bondi was trapped. The more she fought, the deeper she sank. Crockett wasn't just exposing inconsistencies, she was redefining the very terms of the conversation. This wasn't a clash between two women in politics, it was a reckoning between truth and performance, between authenticity and artifice. Crockett closed part 2 with a statement that resonated far beyond the chamber. This isn't about you, Pam. This is about the people who expect justice but never receive it. This is about the families who are tired of excuses and ready for accountability. And tonight, accountability has finally arrived. The chamber fell silent again, heavy with the weight of her words. Bondi sat frozen, her hands clenched, her eyes darting, while Crockett looked composed, resolute, unstoppable. The crowd knew it, the unraveling had begun, and there was no stopping it now. And yet, the most devastating blows were still to come. The atmosphere inside the chamber had transformed. By this point, the audience wasn't merely watching a political exchange, they were witnessing a slow-motion demolition. Jasmine Crockett, with her steady voice and piercing logic, had already cracked the veneer of Pam Bondi's carefully curated reputation. What had once been polished confidence now looked like desperation. And part 3 of their clash would deepen those cracks until they became fractures impossible to repair. Bondi, visibly rattled, attempted to regain ground by leaning heavily on her former role as Florida's Attorney General. She reminded the chamber of her years in public service, the cases she had won, the headlines she had commanded. "I didn't just serve the people of Florida," she declared, her tone sharp with forced authority. "I protected them. My record stands as proof of my dedication to the law." It was a familiar tactic. Invoke authority, cite years of experience, and hope the audience equates tenure with credibility. But Crockett, sitting opposite, was ready. She allowed Bondi to list her accomplishments uninterrupted, even nodding slightly as though listening with genuine respect. But her eyes never wavered. They burned with anticipation. When Bondi finally finished, Crockett leaned forward, her hands folded neatly, and delivered her response. "Pam," Crockett began, her voice calm but unyielding, "longevity does not equal integrity. You can sit in power for decades and still fail the very people you claim to protect." The chamber stirred again. Crockett's words sliced through the air, leaving Bondi's litany of achievements exposed as hollow. She continued, weaving her response into a devastating critique. "Your record is filled with high-profile cases. Yes, but what about the ones you didn't take? What about the scandals you ignored? The powerful figures you shielded, the selective justice that favored the wealthy over the vulnerable? Service without fairness is not service at all, it's complicity. Bondi's face tightened. She gripped her papers as though holding them tighter could anchor her. "That's outrageous," she snapped, her voice betraying her nerves. "You don't understand the complexities of those cases. Prosecutorial discretion isn't bias, it's strategy." Crockett's rebuttal came instantly. Strategy or selective protection? Because when your discretion repeatedly benefits those with power and money, it stops being strategy and starts being corruption. The people in this country don't want a prosecutor who knows how to bend the system. They want one who knows how to serve justice. The silence that followed was deafening. Bondi attempted to interject again, but the chamber seemed to have already decided. Crockett's words carried the weight of truth. Journalists in the press row weren't just scribbling now. They were live tweeting, their screens glowing as Crockett's quotes spread like wildfire. Clips of her sharp exchanges began to trend across social media. Commentators online compared her poise to a surgeon dismantling an opponent with precision tools. Hashtags like number Crockett vs Bondi and number Truth Overspin shot to the top of trending lists. Bondi, sensing the shift slipping further from her grasp, doubled down on her defensive posture. "Congresswoman, you're twisting facts to fit your narrative. If you had ever served as Attorney General, you'd know that sometimes hard decisions have to be made, decisions the public doesn't understand in the moment." Crockett leaned back slightly, her expression a mix of amusement and disappointment. She let Bondi's words hang before responding, this time more forcefully. "Pam, I have served as an attorney. I have been in the trenches fighting for people who couldn't afford your kind of justice, and I didn't hide behind hard decisions. I faced them. I looked people in the eye and told them the truth. That's what leadership is. Not hiding, not deflecting, not protecting the powerful at the expense of the powerless." The chamber erupted again. Even those who had once leaned toward Bondi's side could not deny the authenticity of Crockett's delivery. She wasn't just arguing, she was teaching, reminding the audience that public service was supposed to mean something deeper than political posturing. Then came the pivotal moment of part 3. Crockett pulled a series of documents from her folder reports and articles that detailed questionable decisions Bondi had made during her tenure. She held them up, reading directly from them, each word echoing through the chamber. "You declined to pursue charges against corporations that defrauded thousands of Floridians. You failed to hold accountable those who exploited the vulnerable. And yet, you spent taxpayer dollars chasing cases that looked good on camera but meant nothing to real people's lives. That isn't justice. That's theater." Bondi's eyes widened, her mouth opening in protest, but Crockett pressed on. "And let's not forget," she added, "the glaring conflict of interest that tainted one of your most publicized decisions. You didn't just fail to serve justice, you compromised it. And you expect us to believe that was strategy? No, Pam, that was betrayal." The words landed like thunder. The audience gasped audibly. Even some of Bondi's allies shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't speculation, this was documented history being laid bare in front of the nation. Bondi's attempt at a rebuttal fell flat. She stumbled over her words, her polished demeanor cracking under the weight of Crockett's unrelenting assault. "Those reports are biased," she stammered. "They're written by people who don't understand." Crockett cut her off, not with anger but with cold precision. "No, Pam, they're written by people who lived through the consequences of your choices, and their pain is not bias. Their suffering is not spin, it's reality, and you can't erase it with talking points." The chamber fell silent once more. Camera zoomed in on Bondi's face, her expression betraying the truth. She was outmatched, cornered, and unraveling. Crockett, sensing the moment, delivered the closing lines of Part 3 with devastating clarity. You can call it strategy, you can call it discretion, but the people will call it what it really is: injustice. And tonight, no spin can save you from the truth. Bondi slumped slightly in her chair, the fight draining from her eyes. Crockett, on the other hand, sat tall, her presence commanding, her words reverberating not just in the chamber, but across every screen where Americans were watching. By the end of Part 3, it was no longer a debate, it was a reckoning. And the audience knew Bondi's career wasn't being challenged, it was being dismantled, piece by piece, by a woman who had come prepared, not just to win an argument, but to expose a legacy. And there were still 7 parts left to go. By now, the battle has shifted from a clash of resumes to a contest of endurance, and Jasmine Crockett showed no signs of tiring. Pam Bondi, however, was unraveling visibly with every passing exchange. What had started as an attempt to remind the chamber of her legacy had turned into an exercise in survival. Every time she tried to find her footing, Crockett knocked her back down with precision and poise. Bondi clung to one final defense: her media persona. For years, she had been a polished presence on television, wielding her legal experience like a weapon, packaging complicated issues into digestible sound bites that favored her side. She leaned on that instinct now, hoping that rhetorical flair could save her. "You talk about injustice as if you own the truth," Bondi declared, her voice rising. "But in the real world, leadership isn't about grandstanding. It's about making hard choices and standing by them. I've faced more scrutiny than most, and I never wavered. That's what makes me credible." It was the kind of statement that had once played well in television interviews. But in this chamber, under the scrutiny of Crockett's unrelenting focus, it sounded rehearsed, empty, like a speech delivered to an audience that had already left. Crockett waited until the applause Bondi expected failed to materialize, then leaned forward, her eyes locked on her opponent. "Credibility?" Crockett asked softly, almost incredulously. "Credibility isn't built on how often you face the camera. It's built on how often you face the truth." The line landed with devastating clarity. The crowd reacted instantly, gasps, murmurs, even a ripple of applause from those who could no longer hide their admiration for Crockett's command of the moment. Bondi blinked rapidly, trying to maintain her composure, but her confidence was slipping through her hands like sand. Crockett didn't stop there. She shifted the conversation from Bondi's individual record to the larger implications of her approach. "What you call hard choices," she said, her voice rising with conviction, "millions of people call betrayal. You chose the powerful over the powerless, the wealthy over the working class, the connected over the voiceless. And the worst part, you call it leadership. That's not leadership, Pam. That's cowardice dressed in a robe." The reaction was electric. Bondi's face flushed as she scrambled to respond. "That's not fair," she snapped, her voice carrying an edge of desperation. "You don't know what it's like to sit in my seat, to have to balance politics with the law." Crockett cut her off with surgical timing. "No, Pam, you're right. I don't know what it's like to balance politics with the law. Because when I practice law, I don't balance justice against convenience. I fight for what's right. And that's the difference between us. You serve politics, I serve people." The chamber erupted again, louder than before. Bondi's attempt to reframe herself as a victim of circumstance had backfired spectacularly. Crockett had taken her admission that politics shaped her decisions and turned it into the very indictment that now defined her. Journalists scrambled to push updates, lied, Headlines began to form in real time. Crockett calls out Bondi. You served politics, I serve people. On social media, viewers replayed the exchange in disbelief, posting clip after clip with captions like, "The moment Pam Bondi lost the argument," and "Crockett just ended her career in 30 seconds. Bondi tried a new approach anger. Her voice rose, her gestures grew sharper, her words came faster. You sit there and lecture me about service, but you don't understand the weight of responsibility I carried. I kept criminals off the streets, I protected Florida's families, and I'll be damned if I let you twist my legacy into a caricature." But Crockett wasn't moved. She tilted her head slightly, her expression calm, almost pitying. "Pam, this isn't me twisting your legacy. This is your legacy. The decisions you made, the people you ignored, the cases you mishandled, they define you. You can shout, you can stomp, you can demand respect, but respect isn't claimed, it's earned. And you've spent years losing it, case by case, decision by decision." Bondi faltered again. Her anger, instead of rallying the crowd, made her look unhinged, defensive, cornered. Crockett's calm composure only amplified the contrast. And then Crockett landed another blow, this time broader and more devastating. She addressed not just Bondi, but the entire audience. This is what happens when politics masquerades as justice. This is what happens when careers are built on appearances instead of accountability. And tonight, the people watching finally see the truth. They see that power without integrity is nothing but corruption in a prettier dress. The chamber roared with reaction. Even those who had remained silent throughout could not help but acknowledge the force of Crockett's words. Bondi's shoulders slumped, her once commanding presence shrinking under the weight of public opinion turning against her in real time. For the first time, Bondi looked small. Her eyes darted across the room as though searching for support, but there was none to be found. Crockett's presence dominated the space, her words echoing like thunder long after she stopped speaking. Part 4 closed with a scene that would be replayed for years. Crockett leaned back in her chair, her voice steady, her gaze unshakable. "Pam, tonight isn't about me destroying your career. Tonight is about you revealing it for what it truly is. I don't have to twist anything. The truth does the work for me." Bondi had no reply. Her silence spoke louder than any argument she could have mustered. The battle was tilting further out of her reach, and everyone knew it. And still, Crockett had more left to say. By the time the chamber shifted into its 5th round of exchanges, the narrative had been set. Jasmine Crockett was in full command. Pam Bondi, who had built an entire career on maintaining control of the conversation, was now clinging to fragments of credibility. Her words no longer carried the authority they once had. Instead, they sounded like echoes, fragments of a past reputation that couldn't withstand the present moment. Bondi sat straighter in her chair, gripping her notes with both hands, as if the paper itself could hold her together. Her voice, strained but defiant, rose above the murmurs in the chamber. "Congresswoman Crockett," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "It's easy to criticize from the sidelines, but leadership, true leadership, isn't about tearing people down. It's about making sacrifices. I made sacrifices you couldn't possibly understand." The words hung in the air like a shield. Bondi hoped might finally withstand the barrage. But Crockett didn't flinch. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing slightly, her tone calm yet loaded with gravity. "Sacrifice?" she repeated, letting the word linger. "Pam, sacrifice isn't cutting deals with the powerful while leaving ordinary people to fend for themselves. Sacrifice isn't protecting the interests of corporations while communities collapse under the weight of injustice. Sacrifice is fighting battles you might lose because they're worth fighting. Sacrifice is standing with the powerless, even when it costs you everything. That's sacrifice. What you've done is self-preservation, and the difference is the reason we're sitting here today. The chamber erupted again. Journalists scribbled furiously, their pens flying as Crockett's dismantling grew sharper. Social media lit up instantly with Crockett's line, "What you've done is self-preservation," as clips spread like wildfire. Bondi shook her head, laughing dryly, trying to mask her unraveling confidence with disdain. "You're a master of sound bites, I'll give you that," she sneered. But governing isn't a debate stage. Governing requires pragmatism, not idealism. Crockett leaned back slightly, her lips curving into a faint smile. "Pragmatism?" she countered. Pragmatism isn't abandoning justice for convenience. Pragmatism isn't looking at injustice and deciding it's too complicated to fix. What you call pragmatism, Pam, the rest of us call cowardice. And cowardice is not leadership. It's the slow death of democracy. The reaction was instantaneous. Gasps rippled through the chamber, followed by applause that broke through the usual decorum. Bondi's face tightened, her frustration bleeding through. She raised her voice again, this time abandoning calm altogether. "You sit there and accuse me of cowardice, but I've taken stands you wouldn't dare take. I went after organized crime. I fought fraud. I protected families." Crockett didn't even blink. Her reply was steady, cold, and merciless. "No one doubts you took stands, Pam. The question is, who did you stand for? Because time and again, your stance served the wealthy, the connected, and the powerful. Meanwhile, the families you claim to protect were left unprotected. That's not courage, that's theater, and tonight, the curtain is falling." The metaphor landed hard, echoing across every corner of the chamber. Cameras zoomed in on Bondi's face, capturing the flicker of panic in her eyes. She opened her mouth to respond, but the weight of Crockett's words silenced her. Sensing the shift, Crockett leaned in again, this time pulling another stack of documents from her folder. She didn't slam them down or wave them dramatically. Instead, she calmly laid them out, one by one, each paper representing a decision, a case, a scandal tied to Bondi's tenure. "These aren't my words," Crockett said, her voice low but devastating. "These are reports, testimonies, and records from people who lived through the consequences of your decisions. Do you want to call them liars too? Do you want to say the families who lost everything were simply misinformed? Or do you finally admit that your record isn't one of sacrifice but of betrayal?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Even Bondi's usual defenders avoided eye contact, unwilling to tie themselves to her sinking ship. The weight of Crockett's evidence was too much to dismiss. Bondi tried to push back. "Those cases don't define me," she snapped, her voice cracking. "You can cherry-pick failures, but my successes far outweigh them." Crockett tilted her head slightly, almost with pity. "Pam, when your failures destroy lives, your so-called successes lose their meaning." The measure of justice isn't how many headlines you collect, it's how many people's lives you protect. And by that measure, your career isn't a success story, it's a cautionary tale. The chamber erupted once more, louder this time. Applause, gasps, murmurs, it was chaos. But chaos firmly in Crockett's favor. Bondi sat frozen, her knuckles white as she gripped her notes. She looked like a figure shrinking under the glare of truth. Every ounce of her polished exterior cracking under Crockett's relentless precision. "Crockett, Unshaken, delivered her closing line for part 5 with the calm authority of someone who knew the moment was historic. You've spent years building an image, Pam, but images shatter under the weight of truth. And tonight, the truth has finally caught up with you. Bondi's silence told the story better than any rebuttal ever could. She had walked into the chamber confident that she could handle Crockett. Instead, she was watching her career unravel thread by thread in front of the nation. And the devastating part for Bondi, this was only the halfway point. By the 6th round, the atmosphere inside the chamber no longer felt like a debate, it felt like a trial. And Pam Bondi was the defendant. The witnesses weren't people seated in the room, but the voices of the public whose stories had been folded into Jasmine Crockett's arsenal of evidence. Each time Crockett opened her folder, she wasn't just wielding paper, she was summoning the lived experiences of those left bruised by the policies Bondi once championed. Bondi shifted in her seat again, her polished composure now visibly fractured. She tried to recover with a rehearsed smile, the kind she had used countless times on television interviews and campaign rallies, but it landed flat. The chamber wasn't buying it. The journalists weren't buying it. The viewers at home weren't buying it. Crockett seized the moment. She leaned in, her voice steady but tinged with a rising intensity that made everyone in the room lean forward unconsciously. Pam, the issue here isn't just you,